So thank you, Emma, for getting the recording going. Um, and this recording will be made available to everyone. So if you're registered for this series, you'll receive the link to the recording, and also you can share that with others. And if you're not able to make it to one of the calls, then you can always check it out after the fact. Just really want to ask people to be mindful of staying on mute during the call, just for everyone's sanity, unless you're chatting in a breakout room or asking a question. And really encourage you too, if you can turn on your video, if you're in a place where you can show your face, it's really nice, especially for guest presenters, to feel like we're talking to other human beings and not just black boxes with names on them. So if that's something that you can do, just encourage you to lean into that. And also, please change your name. You can, in the little like ellipses in the top corner of your box, you'll see an option to be able to rename yourself. And you can put your first name and your pronouns that you prefer to be addressed as. And that'll be really helpful as we help to facilitate conversation and discussion and meet and connect with one another. All right. So I think just a quick overview of how today's going to go. Andy's going to tee up the conversation in a minute. Then we're going to hear a little bit from like a panel type conversation to sort of set the stage. And then we're going to go into some breakout rooms for y'all to connect with each other and be able to share like what's up with land access in your community? Like, how is this relevant to your community food work? What kinds of challenges and opportunities are being presented around land access? And just be able to like kind of engage in that conversation more than just listening to the presenters. So we'll do that. And then we'll come back and hear a little bit more in depth based on some of the things that you share as well, a little bit more in depth from Steve and Betsy and oh goodness, why am I spacing on the last person's name?
And
Ben. I'm sorry, Ben. um, so looking forward to hearing from y'all in a minute. Before we get going, I'm just going to remind us of the community agreements for this community of practice and all of the spaces that we host as part of the Food Systems Leadership Network. Thanks, Emma, for bringing those up. So this is in recognition that we are all creators and stewards of culture. It's the verb, culture is a verb that we co-create together every time that we are in community with one another. So within the Food Systems Leadership Network, we honor and celebrate our collective wisdom, knowing that together we know a lot. We're mindful of our power, privilege, and how much space we take up. We take responsibility for impact, regardless of intent. We give grace to one another and approach conflict with curiosity. We challenge assumptions, respect our differences, and speak from our own experience. We honor confidentiality. Lessons leave, stories stay. We take care of our own physical, mental, and emotional needs, and we meet each other where we are. Showing up is enough, and listening is participating. So if there's one of those that really resonates with you today, I encourage you to shout it out in the chat. And also just invite everyone to help us live into these agreements together. All right. Thanks, Emma. Take that down. And Andy, I think I'm going to hand it over to you.
sure, thanks, Susan. I'm Andy Fisher. I'm with a group called ISCD. We are the training and technical assistance providers for community food projects. So I just want to acknowledge that USDA NIFA is supporting this event, and thank you. And it's great to see you all. I think we've got the best turnout we've had so far, and I'm seeing lots of names of folks that I've known over the years. So it's wonderful to have that. So we're talking about land access today. And so the question is why? Why are we talking about land access in today's call? And you can't grow food without land, with maybe a few exceptions, perhaps aquaculture, even container farming, vertical farming need land. And land acquisition is one of the most significant barriers to food and farming projects. As you know, good farmland is increasingly expensive to acquire, and suburban sprawl continues to pave over much of the nation's best farmland. If you just take a look at the Central Valley in California, you can see how sprawl along the 99 corridor has taken up some of the best farmland in the country. at the urban level, many jurisdictions still devalue urban agriculture as a lower value, lower priority use of land than commercial or manufacturing uses. So the question is, how do we get here? Land was not always a commodity. It wasn't always something that was bought and sold. And the history of land ownership in America is intricately tied to colonization of the continent, of the expropriation and theft from indigenous nations, Mexicans, Blacks, and many others. Land ownership was central to slavery, to the conquista of Latin America, and to manifest destiny, and continues to be a central feature of American capitalism. And if you think land ownership is passe in today's digital world, just consider that Bill Gates, who's the embodiment of the computer age, he is now America's largest farmer. He owns 270,000 acres. So our conversation is going to hint at a few possible paths forward in this situation. There are many. We're just talking about, this is a very complex topic, obviously, so we can only get a little bit scratch the surface on it. But the presenters are going to address alternative forms of land ownership grounded in institutions that are accountable to the communities in which they reside. So I'm just going to introduce the speakers, and then I'm going to ask them a couple of questions just to kind of get things going. So Steve Schwartz is with us. He's the executive director of Interfaith Sustainable Food Collaborative in Sonoma County, California. He's an experienced food systems leader with over 25 years of work in a wide range of topics. He's collaborated with community advocates and farmers to advance policies that center food justice and sustainable agriculture, and has worked to increase accessibility of land for beginning and immigrant farmers. He founded the Interfaith Sustainable Food Collaborative in 2012 with a mission of facilitating land access for faith communities engaged in local food production. On the other side of the country in Providence, we have Margaret DeVos and Ben Torpy at the Southside Community Land Trust. Margaret also has 25 years of experience working in community development in Detroit and Providence, and serves on the Rhode Island Land Trust Council. By developing local food systems that work for everybody, she works to create positive change in public health, youth and community opportunity, the environment, and civic pride. And Ben is the Urban Edge Farm Manager at Southside Community Land Trust. And his work has included developing a CSA as part of a co-housing collective in the Hudson Valley. He's worked with refugees to build a community garden in South Providence. And from 2012 to 2021, he co-managed Scratch Farm, a low-till community-supported market garden at Urban Edge Farm. And I know Southside Community Land Trust is a current CFP grantee and also received grants in the past. So just given that, getting those formalities out of the way, if we can get going on the content, I just want to ask Steve a quick question. You've been in the sustainable ag movement in California for a long time. So can you tell us a little bit about the challenges in land access on the West Coast? And, how do those issues differ from the rural to the urban to suburban areas? And what's changed over the course of those 25 years?
Well, the old school way people used to get access to land for farming would be to, hang out at a coffee shop where some farmers were, and hear about a parcel that's going to be left up, and then see about trying to lease it or buy it. It never really went on a public market. And that's part of why BIPOC farmers were at a real disadvantage, right? They didn't even know when a parcel was going to come up. So I think that's part of what, and I don't think this was in the bio, but I also founded California Farm Link, and we really started to help build, help beginning and immigrant farmers get access to land and financing. But in terms of what's changed, I think one thing that's changed is the marijuana, this market, right? I mean, I've talked to vegetable growers that lost their leases because a pot grower could, pay more. That's one of the scenarios, but suburban development is another huge piece of it. We're seeing more and more BIPOC farmers, especially Latinx and women farmers, get access to land, as people know, and that's or seeking access to land, and that's where a lot of the growth is in the beginning farms. So we'll say more about opportunities on faith land later.
Great. Thanks, Steve. So Margaret and Ben, I had a couple questions for you. And so what's the nature of access to land for farming and gardening in an older developed city like Providence? Is the shortage more acute and more expensive in more developed parts of the country, like where you're at?
Thanks for asking. Providence has the most expensive agricultural land in the country. This has been going on this way for decades. We're a very small state. Access to land for local food systems is very minimal. We do have the benefit of lots of markets, and there's a lot of wealth. So it's possible for people to sell expensive foodstuffs into local marketplace. It doesn't make a huge economic, it's possible, and you can run a sustainable operation that way. What we find, though, is that if you're wanting to offer food as a farmer, or if you're wanting to offer food as a farmer, I'll just speak from the farmer perspective, to low income customers, you can't operate a farm, you can't buy the farmland, you can't get a loan, you can't pay back a loan. You know, the economics just don't work, and that's why we've inserted ourselves there. Did I answer your question? Is there more? What did I forget?
No, no, I didn't know if Ben was going to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think land is super hard to come by in Rhode Island. We have a lot of tourism. We have agricultural land that's close to the ocean, and a lot of development pressure from Boston, New York, just the metro corridor. So that's not helpful if you're trying to make a living growing food. So yeah, what we try to do is secure as much land as we can, but then also, and I'll talk more about this later, but just help growers make the most of small acreage. And so we're pretty well positioned to, because the markets are strong, it doesn't take as much acreage as it does in other places to make a living, but obviously still more is needed. And the demand from especially BIPOC farmers is strong, and we don't have enough land available right now. So that's part of what we're working on.
Thank you. So kind of along those routes, so land is scarce. It's a challenge to acquire it. And I don't want to steal your thunder because I know you're going to talk about this later on, but why you're both you're involved in the land trust community there. Why has land trust been such an important tool to acquire land for farming and gardening in Providence and in Rhode Island?
Well, there's a real ethic of using conservation easements for agricultural land here. The state of Rhode Island sets aside funds for conservation easements, and the Natural Resources Conservation Service, USDA, will match whatever the state puts aside. There are municipal and private land trusts that raise money for conservation. So there's a real land. So in the midst of the development pressure constantly, the being in this megapolis, this Northeast megapolis, I don't know if I'm saying that the most sophisticated way, but there is a response. Oh, well, we have to conserve this land. And so there has been a movement in Rhode Island that's pretty well supported to use federal and philanthropic funds to purchase the development rights on agricultural properties so that the farms can be affordable for a farmer to purchase, or be affordable for a farmer to keep in operation. So, Southside Community Land Trust, we were founded in the 80s. And I think there was an idea that, that was a really great opportunity because that ethic existed here. Some of our properties, our rural properties, are all conserved. We wouldn't have been able to afford them any other way. And some of our urban properties are even we've sold the development rights for them as well. So that's what, now some of our properties we just own outright, and use them for agriculture and don't have a conservation easement on them. So we haven't sold any of the portion of our rights to the property. So that financial tool, I think, is the main thing that makes the land trust an important organizational structure or system or way of approaching local food system development. More? Ben, you have something?
I think that's good.
Okay.
Great. No, thank you. So one more question, and then we'll break into our small groups. And I don't know if anybody's ever made these connections before, but this is for you, Steve. So I'm a big Lou Reed fan. And Lou Reed gets pretty cynical. And at his most cynical, he once saying, you can't depend on any churches unless there's real estate you want to buy. So I know you work with churches on kind of acquiring land and getting them to use land for farming. So he's riffing off that popular conception that religious institutions are wealthy landlords. And so I know you've been working on this issue for a long time. If Lou were still alive and you were in a room with him, what would you tell him to give us a little bit more hope?
Well, that's an old song, Andy, and the fact that I know it and like it, that kind of dates me too, but it's a great song. So, you can't depend on any churches unless it's real estate that you want to buy. If Lou Reed were here, I would say, thanks for your music. And then I'd say, I think you missed it, the point here a bit. When it says you can't depend on churches unless it's real estate you want to buy. I don't think churches and other faith-based organizations are selling a lot of land. I think they have a lot of land. And the question and the opportunity is how much of that would be leased or shared with some kind of cooperative agreement with people on this call to produce food. And sometimes they might lease that or do an agreement that's $1 a year or free. So there's opportunity in this. Yes, a lot of land is owned by the churches, but often they have a mission that includes helping immigrants, BIPOC communities, and it's an opportunity. So,
thank you. Thanks for that. So Susan, you want to take it back? And I know we want to break into breakouts.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for setting the stage. I've got like so many questions and things I want to talk about now, and you probably do too. If you're coming to this call, you've got some level of interest in the topic of land access. So, wanted to give y'all an opportunity to connect with each other now and share, what's coming up with this topic for you. Like, why does it matter? How is it playing out in your community? What are some of the dynamics and issues surrounding access to land for farming and gardening in your community? So we're going to send you out into groups of 4 for about 10 minutes. Y'all can connect with each other and just kind of popcorn a little bit what this means to you. And if at any moment you're not feeling comfortable in your breakout group and you want to come back to the main session, totally okay to do. So we'll just be holding it down on this side. And yes, we can drop that prompt in the chat. Thanks for that reminder, Amanda. So introduce yourselves to each other and chat a little bit about this, and we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes. Some smiles and seeing some smiles. So hopefully you enjoyed having a moment to just connect with some new friends. Would love to hear just from a couple people quickly, like what came up? Anything you heard someone say or share in your breakout room that you think could be, an offering even to the guest presenters of like what's alive in the room, what was coming up for y'all, and then they can really help as they share in their presentations, maybe talk about some of the issues and challenges that y'all were talking about in your breakout rooms. If you could like drop it in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and unmute, and just chime in.
Could we get Alice from Hawaii to finish hers? Sorry, I was too talkative.
No,
Yeah.
sorry, Penny. I left the room. I left the room too quickly. But I just shoot you a direct message with my email. We can connect. But yeah, struggles, challenges. I think there are a lot of shared challenges. Hawaii is extremely food insecure, and 85 to 90% of the food are imported. And the majority port, if the port has any disaster situation like Maui, what happened if the port shut down? The islands only have enough food for less than a week. And majority of the storage, the big grocery stores are all by the 15 miles within the coastline. So if anything happens, it's but again, there's silver lining. Hawaii has enough land that can grow good, nutritious food. And we're zone 9A to 13A, which are super blessed. So a lot of food actually crops grow here, including vanilla beans, cacao, and all the veggies, bok choy. So there are silver lining. And our governor just assigned Act 90, which will be issuing, I think, 110 acres of land to different farmers. So just keeping on track and just monitoring how that goes. Mahalo for the opportunity to share. Thank you.
Yeah, right on, Alice. If you have a link to that policy that was passed, that'd be really interesting to learn about. So
Will
thank
do. I'll
you.
send to the chat.
Yeah. Maria, want to chime in?
Hi, yeah, thank you. So I live in well, I'm living on the land of the Methow people here in Mazama, Washington, up in Okanagan, incredibly rural, beautiful, agriculturally rich area. And we're watching a lot of our young farmers leave the area because the land prices are rising. And so I'm just so happy that y'all put this on today, because it's unfortunately clear that this is an issue, for all of us. So I'm looking forward to hearing what some of those creative solutions would be. We have one particular farmer, like a young couple, and they just bought this land from a family member, and also just had a baby. And so they had been farming this land, but weren't on the hook for the mortgage. But now they're on the hook for the mortgage, and really trying to figure out how to make all of this pencil. And so, definitely here on behalf of my community to listen and learn about what some of these creative strategies are for young farmers like the one that I'm talking about. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. And thanks for the work that you do. Let's hear from one more person. John? Let's see. You know how to unmute? Here, I can.
Nope, we're good.
There you go. There you go.
So I'm actually sitting in for my colleague who's getting ready to jump on. So I had two things. I did get permission from my organization. One of the things I mentioned in our group session is that we actually had an interview, a coffee talk with our CEO and one of the leaders of our urban community farming partners. So it was a very interesting conversation, because he took a small plot of land behind his church, and I forget how many pounds they're now producing, but it built a great relationship with the seniors and the younger population, because they're able to share stories. So that's the first thing. And then his methodology has now become international. He would have never thought. So I'm just waiting to get the link from that so I can drop that in the chat. And I did have a question for the person who was just speaking from Hawaii, because I was curious as to how their farming has returned to some sense of normalcy after the tragedy that they occurred. I think it was last year.
Mm. Yeah.
Yes,
Was it
August
a
8th.
fire? I know it was something
Maui
like
fire, August 8th, 2023.
How have you all recovered in terms of farming and in terms of land quality? And
I
is
am
that
so interested in that conversation, and like actually would really be interested, Alice, and anyone else from Hawaii, if we could craft a future session to really
sure?
talk about response, like emergency response and community food systems. So let's just for now put a pin in that because I think it's a very rich and I think all of us are interested, but also wanted to make sure we manage time well today so we can hear from our presenters here in a minute. So thank you. Thanks for raising those great questions and some of the solutions, policy solutions, for example, is one strategy towards increasing land access. And I think that was a good segue over to Steve in terms of using faith lands for food access as well. So I think with that, I will pass it over to Steve to share a little bit more about his work and strategy. Hey, Steve, man, you're on mute.
Hi,
There
Interfaith
you go.
Food is a nonprofit that I started about 12 years ago to build the local sustainable food system. And we do organizing with faith communities, churches, mosques, synagogues, Buddhist temples, Sikh communities. And we serve as a bridge between the secular local food movement and the faith communities. And we do advocacy and local projects. But today we're going to be talking about faith lands. So if we, Emma, you can cruise on down that slideshow couple. So our mission, I just talked about the mission, but we're really working to empower faith communities to cultivate their values. And that can be supporting family farmers, increasing access to local healthy food, and more. And I'll say where I live, and you can go ahead and tap on there. About 40% of the community gardens in Sonoma County are on faith community sites. They're not necessarily the churches or other faith groups that are running these gardens, but they might be making them available to secular groups and others, like many of the ones people on the phone. Nobody knows your communities like you do. I want to start with a little, visual journey for each of you. Close your eyes or think about what was the drive you took from your house to where your community food projects are happening, or when you do go, if you're working from home, where are those sites, and how many churches or other faith communities do you pass in that journey from where you wake up to where you are helping people grow food? Can you think about, you might be passing a lot of faith communities or churches and other spots that you don't even think of, you don't even notice. Anybody visualize passing more than 5 churches on the way to your garden or your farm? Yeah. Think about that. So for me, faith communities, I have land in every community. There's churches in very low income neighborhoods. There's very small towns that don't have much industry, or don't have much of a town center anymore. Churches and other faith groups are still there. The question is, when are their land assets being utilized? And what I mean by that is, for many of those congregations, like they'll have a little campus for the churches. They'll have a parking lot, right? They might have a kitchen, etc. But then they have some land in the back that's vacant and it's suitable for farming, and or gardening. If it is, sometimes that underutilized spot, that part that's not paved over in the back, especially in suburban areas, is used once a year for a food festival or a overflow parking on Christmas Day or Easter Sunday, or a Buddhist temple doing a large, Lunar New Year celebration. But there's land that's being not utilized at all or only part of the year. Let's forward on. The Faithlands is a movement to facilitate beginning and immigrant farmers, BIPOC farmers, and gardeners gaining access to lands owned by faith-based organizations. So we've been working since 2017 to come together and share models and lessons and inventory strategies across, partners in different states. We've had a few convenings out in California, and we're gonna do one in Ohio in August, which I'm gonna tell you more about. But it builds on a long history of land that faith groups have being made available for folks to do things that I think you all love. It could be developing housing for affordable housing, could be community gardens, and it could be leases to private farmers. All right, let's move on. This is an example of a place called the Bishop's Ranch. I mean, a lot of you might think of a faith community land as a little church on a corner, but you can also think about camps or retreat centers. This Episcopal Retreat Center is huge, you know, by my standards, 320 acres. 20 acres was leased to a private dairy for over 50 years, right? Let's move on. So what is a faith-based organization? A kind of HUD comes up with this like rubric. Congregations, that's the church that you pass or maybe go to, or the synagogue. But it could also be a national network, like it could be the Church of God in Christ, or the the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, or the Union of Reformed Judaism. They have these national entities, and sometimes regional, right? There's also social service agencies like Lutheran Social Services or Catholic Charities that you probably have heard of or might have partnered with. Some of those have access to land, some don't. Some have projects that you're working with, and some don't. There's also freestanding religious organizations, like they're incorporated. They're not connected to some larger national movement, right? A lot of the evangelical churches are in that category, and some of the Buddhists and others. So there's a lot of difference in terms of capacity and within those different kinds of faith-based organizations. I want to encourage you all today to think about faith-based organizations through, you know, a different lens. I mean, I don't have a dog in the fight whether you're, you know, religious or atheist or agnostic or anti-religious, you know, but think about it from a community food lens. What does this represent to you? If they own vacant or underutilized land in cities, suburbs, etc., how's that an opportunity? And they own it free and clear in many, many cases, right? Do they have mission alignment with you? Faith groups do care. You know, every faith tradition is supporting people having healthy food and healthy bodies, and many are doing a lot of work with, you know, food pantries or whatever it might be to help get food to people who need it. And in some cases, the churches are trusted institutions. They have relationships not just with members in their own congregations, but in the neighborhood too. You know, people talk about triple bottom line investing. I'm not going to say the faith communities invented that, but I'm going to go ahead and say that they invented the double bottom line investing, where you're looking at not just the capital returns, but also the money capital returns, but also what does it do in terms of social justice, right? So we had nuns in the 70s that had retirement plans, and they said, we don't want to invest our money in making bombs or the Vietnam War. We want to really look at every dollar that we invest, and does it meet our personal and our religious mission? So churches today, many of them are, you know, concerned about, say, immigrant rights, but they're looking for more things to do about it. And if you're helping them lease land that they own for a community food project, that's a win-win. You have mission alignment. Let's keep going. National Faithlands Gathering, I just mentioned it. We're going to be gathering on August 6th through 8th in Delaware, Ohio, at a place called the Methodist Theological Seminary, where they've got 10 acres that they're farming. They've got high tunnels. They're feeding their own seminarians. They're teaching people about the connection between faith and food. But this is going to be a gathering, and that we expect to have some travel funds available for folks that are leasing lands from faith groups, or the decision makers at these larger institutions that could be working with farmers and gardeners. All right, let's move on. This is an example of a parcel just under 5 acres outside of Sacramento. What do you see there in the highlighted area in the middle? Do you see an opportunity to farm? Do you see an opportunity for a community garden with, 20 plots and a community plot? Or do you see another housing development? And does it have to be one or the other? A lot of opportunity. Let's move on. Thanks, Emma. We've been looking since really 2018 at, like, say, how many faith-based organizations, how many properties are there, and what are the opportunities? I have to say, a lot of times when we talk to someone who is has vacant land that's owned by a church, and we say, hey, what about doing a community farm there? Would you like to lease it to a beginning farmer? Or would you like to have a community garden there? They're thinking it ain't broke, nothing to fix, or they're thinking I'm busy, I don't want to talk about a new project, or they're thinking we were going to maybe do affordable housing there. So bringing in food production can be an aha moment, or a kind of a curveball for them, but that's something that we're working on, and we want to proactively provide technical assistance to folks like that through this work. And when I say we, it's not just me. People are doing this in North Carolina and New York and Texas and onward. Let's go. Emma, hit me. So how many parcels are there? How many acres? I don't think anybody can tell you that. I don't think there's any real solid data, but where we are, Northern California, we used some land, real estate software, and we started looking at properties owned by religious institutions and found 615 that are between 2 acres and 700 acres in size. And I can just say, if you're doing a community food project on a quarter acre or a half acre, those smaller parcels are many, many, many more than 600 in the same area that are on the smaller parcels. So let's move on. Example, in the San Francisco Bay Area, 38,000 acres are owned by faith-based organizations. It's 100 properties owned by the Episcopalian movement in the Northern California diocese that we have identified. And let me tell you, the Catholics have more in any jurisdiction we've looked at. Like, moving forward.
Hey, Steve, just another minute or two, please.
Okay, let's go. I'm trying to. Fresno, it's an example. Properties are all over. Take the next slide, please. This is a map of Fresno with religious owned properties, different size properties throughout the city. And that's what I'm trying to show here. And I think wherever you live, you're going to find that there are faith community properties nearby. So, and they're not just churches. It might be a band, something that someone willed to the church, and there's nothing developed on it. It's nothing there at all. Let's move forward. And for those properties, they can be seen as liabilities to the faith community organization. But if you come in and say, we want to turn that abandoned lot, put a fence around it, or put an edible fence around it and help people make it into beautiful food production, it's exciting. Let's move on. And churches are in some places on the decline. And so the leaders there are looking for what else can we do to be relevant? What else can we do with our property? So that's part of why I think this is an important opportunity now. There's a new conference on Catholic lands at Notre Dame that's happened twice. People come from all over the world to say, what are we going to do with Catholic lands? Methodist sites are closing, 20-25% of the sites will be closing in the area where I live, and you might see that kind of trend in other places. Okay, let's keep forward. Let's go one more. One more. A lot of models for partnering with faith-based organizations. It could be that the faith group owns and manages a farm or garden site independently. Could be a joint venture with a secular CBO. Sometimes they're partnering with a affordable housing developer, and you could be making sure there's food production happening on the same site, on a piece of it. The other thing I'll say, I think someone put in the chat, land access is not land tenure. Tenure is having a hold of the land. I mean, churches, for the most part, are not going anywhere. They're not trying to sell their properties, and I think they are more willing to do long-term leases than some other properties. Some of you, I'm sure, are doing farming and gardening on projects owned by developers, and they're just waiting to get permits to build. These faith groups may have a different time horizon. And they can, in cases, make decisions quickly. We're going to hear from land trusts. I'm a real fan of helping land trusts make land available for food, but sometimes it takes a few years for those deals to come through. And with these opportunities, it can happen a lot quicker. All right, so let's go forward, please. And then I'll wrap it up. So some summary, that's stable institutions with they have site control predictability. They own these sites, and this is a movement. You all, if you're out there, there's 100 people on this Zoom, and you're doing work in this space. Let me know if you're leasing from a church or another faith group. I'd love to be in touch with you. We're trying to shine a light on more of the models that are working. If you're looking for more land in your community, it's not so hard to find who owns the faith-based organizations. Sometimes this would be knocking on the door or talking to the county assessors, and feel free to reach out and we can try to help you do that. You're all invited to the Ohio meeting. I can't promise how many scholarships there'll be for travel, but we'd love to continue the conversation, and thanks for what you're doing.
All right. Thank you, Steve. That was wonderful. Ben and Margaret, do you guys want to jump in? Talk about your work?
Sure. Yeah, it's so good to go to these things with a colleague. Across the street is a cemetery. So we're talking about that's owned by a church. And so we came up with a whole plan for it. It's going to be an orchard. Ben knows a woman who runs a city tree program. They can plant rosa peach and pear trees, and we can hook them up with the youth programs here that do workforce development and green workforce. We can hook them up with farmers to care for the trees. We just did the whole deal, just like that. So thanks, Steve. Thanks for this. It's practically done. Next time you see me, we'll have an orchard and we'll have lots of fruits in our aggregation program. But I'm just going to talk about, I've been here for 12 years, and it's, other staff people come and go, and I keep having to be like really firm about we only invest in land we own or land that we have a long-term lease on. And that's not 5 years, that's like 20 years. And so we don't get involved in certain partnerships because they can't make the commitment for the length of time that makes sense for us from an they're not operating on the time frame of agriculture. So that's a pretty important thing for us. And the other dynamic that we're starting to deal with here is we're pretty maxed out in terms of our appetite for managing more land. And our appetite seems to be more in the area of putting together funding that will create programs for farmers to buy land. So just sort of think about homeowner down payment assistance. We're all trying to keep the cost of food low. So that means the cost of inputs to farming need to stay low. We need to be working on lowering the cost to be a farmer and filling the gap between what it costs to buy land and then what your return is when you're actually farming and selling on it. So that's where we're kind of moving. But where we've been is South Providence in 1980 was full of vacant property. And the city in 1980 here in the early and mid 80s was trying to get anybody to take these residential parcels. And so probably like some other cities that are on this call, they were selling parcels for $1. If you just turned in a development plan and you could convince them that you were going to maintain it, they would sell it to you for $1. We picked up some parcels that way. We have about 1.5 acres just down the street that we just assembled during that period. It houses an urban farm and a community garden. And that was when, you know, the neighborhood had just been empty of people and businesses. And so we were able to pick up a lot of property at that time at a very low cost. At that same time, and so that's where we ended up owning a lot of community gardens in South Providence because it was possible, because it was affordable. Probably about 20 years into it, somebody gave a farm to in Cranston. Somebody donated a farm to the I people.
10 minutes.
The Lions Club, yeah. And so then the state of Rhode Island ended up owning it, but they needed somebody to manage it. So they looked to Southside Community Land Trust. So that was another way that we got access to land. We've had one 20-year lease. We're about to have another 20-year lease. The city of Central Falls and the city of Providence both looked around for parcels that we could help them build community gardens on and then manage. So we've got about 3 parcels that are like that. But again, they didn't want to make a commitment to a 20-year lease, but we wouldn't do it unless they would. We just picked up this is just some of our properties. There were 2 parcels right next to each other that were going to make about 1/4 acre urban farm. We bought one of them from the Providence Redevelopment Authority, who ended up owning it, and one from a guy. And then once we put together those 2 deals, we then sold the development rights and we got our money back for that project. So these are some of the ways that we make the deals work. The Good Earth Farm we just bought not too long ago. It's about 24 acres. And how we did that, well, I had to raise the money. Like I had to go to individual donors and ask them for money. But, you know, we have a history of asking people to give us money for land. So we do have a group of people. But the way that became actually affordable is because it was discounted because they weren't selling me the development rights because it had a conservation easement on it. And also the farmers who owned it didn't want to leave their house. So they were granted a life estate, and that took down the cost of the farm even lower by like $130,000 cheaper. So we were actually able to afford it. So there are a whole bunch of different kinds of deals that you can do, but you have to be willing to really kind of slice and dice it. And you've got to have a community that supports you, because at some point you actually do need the cash. And there aren't a lot of government programs to help you buy land. Those NRCS conservation easements, maybe you have a state that does it like we do. Also, we're trying to get NRCS, we're trying to put a proposal into NRCS for a regional conservation program that would allow us to use some NRCS funds to help farmers purchase land. So, and then another thing that sometimes happens, and this happened during COVID, this guy, Rob, wanted to sell. He was moving to the UK. He had a house and he had 2 vacant parcels on both sides of the house. One of the vacant parcels he wanted to sell with the house so they could have a yard. The other vacant parcel he wanted to sell to Southside Community Land Trust. I was at home with a 3- and a 4-year-old and a husband with COVID, and the attorney would not stop calling me. She was getting irritated because I was not being responsive. And they were trying to work out a deal. Ultimately, I said, I can't buy this property. What he did was he said, I'll give you a 10-year, no interest loan. I'll sell it to you for half my asking price. And so now I pay him $337 a month for 10 years. But like, we just started generating momentum around owning land and making it available, and developing kind of capacity here in our organization and in the community to have that kind of real estate savvy, to just be able to roll with it and try to put together these land projects as much as we can. Now, all I'm doing is creating problems for Ben when I do this. And now I think he's going to talk about that. The problems I create.
Okay. I know I don't have much time, but maybe 5 minutes. Is that okay? So yeah, my background is in commercial vegetable farming. Pictures here you see are from my farm that I ran with some friends for 10 years and worked on other people's farms before that. This is on leased land that actually is controlled by the Land Trust, the Southside Community Land Trust that we're talking about at Urban Edge Farm. And now I manage that property doing farmer training, technical assistance, mostly for immigrant refugee farmers. And we are home to, it's 25 acres of cropland. The property is 50 acres overall. And there are, let's see, 15 farm businesses there. So people are working between a third of an acre and a couple of acres. And they sell in Providence, Pawtucket, Central Falls. We have an aggregation program that's funded in part by the CFP grant. And so we help to distribute food in low-income communities in Providence. People are also selling at farmers markets and informal sales channels. So we can go to the next slide. This is just showing some cover crops. So soil health on small acreage is essential for basically like, there's not a lot of land in Rhode Island. Part of my job is to try to help people grow as much food as they can on the small amount of land that we are able to make available. You can go to the next slide. And these are, you know, bountiful harvests can come from small pieces of land. I've seen that in my own experience and try to share that with the growers that we work with. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so we found, I'm going to talk about infrastructure and farmer training, which I know is not exactly what we're talking about, but it's part of the picture. So as a vegetable grower, and I'm sure a lot of people on the call know this, but you know, a raw piece of land is not very helpful for a specialty crop producer. Infrastructure is key. Infrastructure is expensive. Infrastructure is slow to develop. Infrastructure is land access is sort of how I think about it. And so, you know, we partner with, you know, we have a 2501 grant, we have BFRDP that helps support staff, some of whom you see in this photo, and we've pieced the infrastructure together with foundation partners and other sources of funding over the last 20 years. But anyway, deer fencing, irrigation, improved roads so people can get to their fields in all conditions, electricity in the back fields, greenhouses with heat. You can go to the next slide. So yeah, the results are night and day, and we can do more with less land when we have the proper infrastructure and the staffing to maintain it. You can go to the next slide. So some of the farmers that we serve and who bring food to their community with the support of the different funding that we have, utilizing some of the infrastructure that we've been able to invest in over the years. You can go to the next slide. So not only infrastructure, but also farmer training and services strengthen our food access work. You can see Lang here on the left. I meet with farmers that help them order seeds so they can make the most of the land. Lang gets training on how to use the equipment and build healthy soil. Garmet wanted to start growing ginger, so we were able to partner on finding some funding through a specialty crop block grant, and now she grows ginger for our aggregation program. Okay, you can go to the next slide.
Ben, try to wrap it up, okay?
Okay, yeah, so this is Charlotte. Charlotte and Audrey know how to prepare the soil, but we're helping them to be able to maintain their own hoop houses. You can go to the next slide. And so farmer training, yeah, this is like learning how to grow fall carrots so we can get more carrots into the aggregation program. So Seraphine and Josephine growing those carrots, maximizing the small acreage that they do have access to. Next one. We try to build farmer input. This is like a community meeting where we're taking input from farmers about infrastructure development that they want to see. And let me think. Yeah, I think secure tenure is super important, as others have said. Also, this program, I think it's irresponsible to run an incubator farmer training program without realistic next steps for the farmers. So we don't make people leave. We used to have the model that we were an incubator farm, but until we're able to crack the code of helping people do more land deals and gain access to what that next step is, we're basically just running a land access program with farmer training and support. Too often you see a successful business sort of pushed out the door because you have an arbitrary 5-year time limit, and then they're sort of back to square one, or they're back to working at Amazon or what have you. But that's not what we want to see here. We want more food in the community, so we need to support the farmers that we're already training and help them to increase their production capacity. All right, I think that's it.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Margaret and Ben. Appreciate that. Lots of words of wisdom there. So we're pushing up against our time limit here. We've got about 3 more minutes. So we've kind of blown past our Q&A session. So what I'm going to ask y'all to do is, if you have any just quick observations, recommendations, thoughts, conclusions you'd like to pop into the chat, that would be great to share with everybody else. And while you're doing that, I'm going to ask Emma to step in and talk about next steps and the next webinar.
Yeah, thank you. So we have another webinar in this same series lined up for May 22nd. So that one's going to be on shared leadership. We have a few people coming from the Community Services Unlimited Incorporation, and they're going to talk about how the organization uses that model. So join us for that. That's May 22nd, and I'll be putting out information about that through the registration list, so you all kind of automatically will get that info. And then also just a plug for the work that we are doing at ISCD. Andy and I, we are CFP grantees as well, and our grant involves giving technical assistance to other CFP grantees. And so we're really diving into that now, hearing from a lot of grantees about what their needs are and developing material to help support you. So don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have an imminent challenge you're facing with your CFP grant, or just a quick question, and we'd be happy to help you as best we can. I'm going to drop both of our emails in the chat so you can reach out to us. And that's it for me. Susan?
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Emma. And thanks so much, all of you, for sharing your expertise and your strategies so liberally and generously. I hope everybody had a good time here today. Found it being worth your time to join this community of practice, and I hope you'll come back. Next month, we're going to be exploring shared leadership models. So we've got some colleagues and friends from Community Services Unlimited over in Los Angeles that are going to share their story around shared leadership. And so we're here every 4th Wednesday of the month, same bat time, same bat place. If you're registered for this one today, then you are registered for that next one. So you should get a registration link and calendar invite and all of that through Zoom. If you have any challenges with that, just reach out and let us know. And thanks so much for being here. I hope you all have a great day. And thanks again to all the speakers for being with us today. Take care, all.